I'm Shivani Gupta. I'm obsessed with small to medium businesses growing. As business owners, we take so much risk and we want to make sure it's worth it. I believe one of the best presents you can give yourself as a business owner is to be able to learn how to scale your people, your profit, and your processes. Welcome to Grow Your Business podcast. This is Shivani Gupta, your host. I am really excited about having our guest on today. His name is Ben Renshaw, and I had an opportunity to see Ben live in action in Bali, where he was a keynote speaker at a particular conference that I was at. His CV is pretty long, but let me tell you a little bit about him. He is today's one of most foremost leadership thinkers. He's a speaker, as I just shared. He is an executive coach. He's an author. He's written 11 books, including Love Work, Being, Purpose, and his new book is out to be published on how to be a CEO in October of this year. His clients are varied and very large companies, and he's worked with the likes of Allen and Overy, Barclays. He's worked with the Entrepreneurs Organisation. He's worked with the Heathrow Airport. He's worked with Heinz, with Henley Business School, KPMG, and the list goes on. There are dozens and dozens of great companies that Ben has worked on. But what really led me to having him on a guest today was the conversation he started to have on purpose and getting us to think about that very, very differently. Welcome to the podcast, Ben.
Wonderful. It's fantastic to be here. Thank you.
And tell us, with this extraordinary career that you've generated as a speaker, as a coach, as a consultant, and all the things before you arrived at that point, there must have been lots of highs and lots of lows. But take us through some of those big highs and big lows that really got you into who you are today. So, give us a bit more of an insight into who you are as a result of those highs and lows.
Yeah, no, look, it's, I think, everybody, it's life, isn't it? Life, as you say, is an absolute journey of ups and downs, highs and lows. My life started out as a classical musician. So that was my origins. And I actually grew up at a little classical music school just outside London. And for those that know, there's an area called Surrey. It's very beautiful. It's actually known now because there's a football team called Chelsea Football Club. They have their training ground out in a place called Cobham, Surrey. So that whole area now is kind of like the Hollywood of the UK. And but then back then, in fact, where the Chelsea football training ground now, there used to just be a donkey. So that was literally kind of the end of our grounds on the school. And my father happened to be the headmaster. So it was a little international music school. We had 45 children from all around the world from the age of 8 to 18. It was a very, very talented environment, totally focused on high performance. We had some of the greatest musicians in the world traveling through. So it was a very privileged, fortunate background, which I got reminded of a lot. However, there was something missing for me, which was my own sense of purpose. And music was not my vocation. So I struggled a lot during school. And because I was the headmaster's son as well, I got a lot of attention. I used to get in trouble a lot. If there was any problems, it was always me. But the first catalytic moment was when my parents separated. So they went through a very, very painful public divorce. I was 16. The rug got pulled from underneath my feet. Everything that I'd taken for granted was shattered. And that really started my questioning. Why? And I actually remember my mother was very depressed. And this is 40 years ago. And she took me to an introductory talk on meditation, transcendental meditation. And it blew my mind. I walked into a room filled with men in suits who were talking about altered states of consciousness. And I remember very clearly thinking that there's something here. So that kind of, those seeds of curiosity for a different dimension in life started early. I then took a gap year when I left music or left the school and traveled. And in particular, I went to Israel. And there was one amazing moment. So I was off to live on a kibbutz, which is a community down in the Negev desert. And I had a couple of hours before my flight. I had a backpack, my violin. I'd left cold, wet, dreary London. I arrived in beautiful sunshine in Tel Aviv, and I went down and sat on the Mediterranean before my bus, and I had this incredible experience of freedom. And I realized there was more to life than playing the violin. I got back to London a few months later, started at a college called the Guildhall School of Music, and within 2 weeks realized it was not for me. It was like a prison sentence, and thereafter I quit. So walking away from music and my trajectory and future was big. I didn't realize how big it was at the time, but and I didn't know what I wanted to do. But what I did know, there were two things I knew I loved, which were people and problems. And I thought if I put the two together, I'd be happy. I then landed up in America, and I had 5 years on an extraordinary adventure there, engaged with a very, very wide-ranging mix of eclectic approach to development. And then I came back to the UK, set myself up as a problem spotter. So people would come to me, they would tell me about the problems they knew they had. I would tell them about the problems they didn't even know they had yet. We had this great working relationship, but I was peddling problems. And then in the mid-90s, I hooked up with a fellow colleague, and on the back of the National Health Service, we set up something called the Happiness Project. And in the UK, you just don't do happiness. I mean, we do misery, we don't do happiness. And there's not a lot to be happy about here. But it was the origins of what's now known as positive psychology. And again, it just was a whole new chapter for me. And I really, it was an incredible kind of realization of, look, if you look at the big goals in life of happiness and love and success, just the elimination of problems isn't going to get you to those goals. You actually need to really understand, you know, what are they? What is happiness? Well, how do you define it? What does it look like? What does that mean? Love, success, all of this. We then started getting introductions into organizations. And I had no idea at the time, this was the mid-90s. I had no corporate experience. I would walk into the first company I worked with was British Telecom. And I remember, you know, they had over 200,000 colleagues. I walked in, I was like an alien. They looked at me, thought, here's an alien. But out of that I then stumbled into coaching. I was very fortunate to be invited onto the faculty of a coaching program for a defense aerospace company, British Aerospace. And it was all engineers. And we were training up the top 750 as coaches. And that is where I absolutely came home. And I realized coaching for me was the first time I really came across a methodology and an approach that totally resonated with my own beliefs. Because I'm an educationalist at heart. Yeah, everything I'm about is how do you help other people learn and grow and be the best they can be. So that's my raison d'etre. And coaching for me, rather than telling people what to do, create the conditions where they arrive at that for themselves. So, and, you know, and then sorry, it's a long answer to your question, but then I was very fortunate. That mentor was a remarkable guy called Graham Alexander. He was the grandfather of business coaching in Europe. We then wrote a book together, Super Coaching, but he was the coach to the CEO of a company, IHG. And this is about 15 years ago. At the time, they were the largest hospitality company in the world. They had brands like Holiday Inn, Holiday Express, etc. And their CEO, Andy Kozler, fantastic guy, I'm still in touch with today. And he came in, he changed the strategy. They went asset light, sold off every hotel across the world and created a core purpose, great hotels, guests love. And I was very fortunate to work with the company to develop a leadership program called Leading with Purpose. 10 years later, 1,000 leaders later, it was a 3-day immersion, and it built my credentials for purpose. When I started it, again, no idea what I was doing. That's a familiar theme for me. I learned and grew, and out of that bore my absolute passion for purpose, which is where we connected.
That's an incredible story. And I know that even though it's a long answer, it probably is nowhere near long enough in terms of getting all the little nooks and crannies in terms of being able to get to where you have. And so, Ben, when you're working with this big topic of purpose, which everybody speaks about and everybody wants to know what their purpose is, I guess when challenges come your way, whether they're in business or whether in your personal life, people attack challenges different ways. Some people have a process, some people go on a retreat, some people write it down, some people feel through it. Tell us about how you process challenges that come your way.
Well, from a personal perspective.
Either business or
Yeah.
personal.
Yeah, well, let me start with personal. I think that in terms of the discovery of purpose, and for me personally, yeah, it's always been absolutely the heart of who I am. And, most of my drivers have come from that, like to really understand why. Because if I don't understand why, I'm lost. I'm at sea. And all the great adversity that I face, that's at the heart of it. So a couple of examples that, a current one is with my son. So I've got 3 kids, but my 17-year-old Ziggy, amazing guy, very similar to me. He's doing what's called A levels here in the UK. He's not a big fan of school. He's not particularly engaged. It's not fun. And he did his mocks a few weeks ago. We had parents' evening and with the school, and the teachers show up, and I had to really bite my tongue to not give them a little bit of feedback in terms of my own belief about the limitations of the education system and the complete failings of being able to engage my son in a constructive way. And all they do is they go to the results. And I have very little interest in the results. For me, it's about the process. It's about the engagement. How are you helping my son learn? How are you helping him apply knowledge? Because he has the knowledge, but he can't apply it and use it and put it in the form of an essay. Well, what are you doing? What does that look like? So what I do, I then debrief with him, call him up after that, said, what do you think? Because I always start there. How was that for you? What's your learning? And, and he's very clear about that in terms of the gap. And then I just share my own experience. I said, look, from my own experience, actually, the ability to translate knowledge and apply knowledge is one of the biggest life skills that I've actually learned. Now, I didn't know that at the time. Nobody ever educated me about that. And, when I left school, I remember my goal was to never learn anything ever again, because formal education did a brilliant job of totally switching me off from this idea of learning. Now, every day, I've got an insatiable appetite to learn and grow. It is fundamental for me. And so so the way that I now support him is I managed to get him some work experience in hospitality. He absolutely loved it. He's got this idea as an entrepreneur for a drink, for a hydration drink. I'm introducing him to all these mentoring conversations. It's blowing his mind. And so that just gives you one example, like as a dad, how I translate it. From a business perspective, it is literally everything I do. And I think I feel incredibly fortunate, like that. But I have built that muscle. I mean, I'm unemployable, 30 years self-employed. People see that as a risk. I don't see the risk. But again, my writing is probably the best example of that for me, because like I say, useless at school, hated academia. And I'll be really, so I had an amazing experience last week where there's this fantastic woman called Amy Edmondson, who's Harvard professor of leadership. She is the #1 leadership professor in the world, biggest thinker on leadership in the world. And I connected with her 3 years ago. She wrote a book, The Fearless Organization. She coined psychological safety. And, she writes the forwards to my books. And I called her up last week, emailed her last week. And it's, Independence Day, July the 4th. It's a busy time in America. And I reached out to her and checked in. I needed a photo. I needed this. She came straight back to me. And then I said, oh, look, I've been invited to do an event in London. What do you think if we did it together? She goes, yeah, that would be great. I mean, and I can only put that down to a shared purpose, because there's not, there'd be no other reason why she would want to do that and spend time with me. And so I think and genuinely, in the book that you mentioned, I've just written, How to Be a CEO, the way I wrote that was 35 interviews with CEOs that I've built relationship with over the years. And for me, the only reason that they'd want to keep in touch and build relationship and continue to support and contribute to my work is because of purpose. And I think and the reason why is I think it's so personal. When you really connect with your own sense of purpose, literally, I don't remember what people do, but I remember their purpose. And I can track people 15, 20, 25 years. And people write to me after 20, 25 years with their own purpose and how their careers has evolved as a result of that. That is why I do what I do.
That's phenomenal. I love that. I love the fact, isn't it great to have that feedback where people are constantly working on it daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, and then they take that time to let you know, to say, this is how I've been in alignment or out of alignment, but this is how I've been in alignment in terms of working on that. Yeah, that's beautiful. And what about with writing so many books? You've got another one coming out this year, Ben. You're doing all the consulting work. You just talked about the fact that you have 3 kids, teenagers, all of the different things that you do. What about for your own wellness? Like, what do you do for your own wellness, whether that's mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, whatever your belief systems are? Tell us about how you manage you to be able to then do all the work and, the things that you do both in business and personal.
I mean, I think, look, one of the benefits of growing up as a musician was discipline. So I literally had to practice 4 to 6 hours a day. Yeah, right as a child, we were up at 6 a.m, practicing an hour before breakfast. I hated it, absolutely hate. However, I'm very grateful for the inborn kind of, whatever you want to describe it, motivation, discipline. So every day I start my day, with prayer and meditation. So that's my kind of anchor. And I literally actually just lie on the floor and I pray, and then I get up and I meditate. And I just do 6 minutes. What I've learned for me, because I know there's all these different, schools and philosophy, all that. I have to do what works for me. 6 minutes works. And then I exercise daily. So and again, that was an interesting one. A few years ago, traveling a lot, just as you said, then my kids were a lot younger, got my own business, all of that. And I was exhausted. And if anybody asked me how I was, my response was, I'm knackered. So that I'm tired. And I got so fed up of that. And then I really began to focus on where I got my energy from. And the main thing was exercise. And I just recognized that every day I exercised, I had more energy. So I just made a very conscious decision. I'm going to exercise every day. And I've done that ever since. And it's just a habit now. And now how that evolved in COVID was tennis. I love tennis. My club is 7 minutes bike ride from me in London, which in London is, you're fortunate. And in COVID, you were only allowed to play an hour of tennis. So again, I just got locked into this habit of an hour of tennis. And of course, now it's Wimbledon as we're speaking at the moment. And so look, I play tennis or squash nearly every day. And that for me, I've got a great bunch of friends. So so my social connections are really strong. So when I look at, I love sport, I'm very competitive. I never win, but I love to play. So, those dimensions for me are non-negotiable. I'm gluten-free, so I don't drink, I'm very mindful, but again, they're just conscious choices. It's just what works for me. I don't need it. I don't need alcohol. I mean, I'll enjoy a glass every now and again, but it's not like I need to drink, thank goodness. And then I think the other thing that I mentioned again for what my critical thing for wellness is my learning. And obviously right now it's all about AI and ChatGPT and, and look, I'm pretty useless with technology, but I do find it fascinating. And I'll give you a quick example. So I was working with an organization recently. We had a conference for about 250 people, and we were looking at their purpose. And the leadership team were very keen to really get engagement from everyone, getting a point of view from all colleagues. So we had a whole morning with a variety of exercises to really get input from 250 colleagues into this program's purpose. And in the end, we had 30 different statements because everybody was working on tables. And it was brilliant. We just popped it into ChatGPT, 30 statements. It came out with this fantastic paragraph, which literally was this amazing representation of 250 people's contribution. They loved it. Now, there's, if I try to sit down and synthesize and give a weighting, to the wordings and this and that and put this, could never have done it. But in seconds, ChatGPT, fantastic. So, I embrace, so that, look, those are just some examples.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, Ben. I love that not many people have ever said wellness as part of their own wellness, the learning, because it just keeps you so active mentally, but also in terms of being able to apply that into your work, which is, all around purpose for others, but also purpose for you. So.
And look, yeah. I think I consider myself very fortunate. However, I've made it all up. But, my work is my source of wellness.
Absolutely.
No question. And when COVID hit, and literally a lot of my clients at the time, hospitality, aviation, transportation, devastated. So you'd mentioned Heathrow, and at the time, they were one of the busiest airports in the world, serving 80 million passengers, and they dropped the whole, literally the business shredded overnight. Losing $1 million a day, unthinkable stuff. So I took that and I go, well, I've got this time. What am I going to do? And I really thought about it. And I thought, at this time, what do people need? And they need to love their work. And I need to reconnect with my love of work because it was really challenged. So then I came up with the idea, love work, how to thrive at work, and wrote a book on it. So actually, I use times like that of adversity, and I go, personally, what can I learn? And then how can I share that with others?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. What about future aspirations, Ben? Where to from here? Whether it's a year out, 5 years out, 10 years out, what are some of the things that you go, they're still on my bucket list, I really want to do that? Or, it might be to write another 11 books. Like, tell us about some of your future aspirations in terms of what you want to do.
It's a great question. I've had a very interesting relationship with future and destinations and goals. So I am very goal orientated. I'm very ambitious and big picture thinker. However, that used to actually, the biggest challenge I had with that in the past was it would completely take away from my ability to make the most of today and just be present and enjoy today. And I could always tell you what an amazing, glorious future I was going to have in 5, 10, 15 years. But today, I'm miserable. Today, I'm exhausted. Today, I'm not the type of person I want to be. So actually, one of my biggest learnings and challenges has been, how do I genuinely just be present today and not live this glorious future in the future, but live it today. And so, yeah, I can tell you how I would love to continue to, write books and contribute to big organizations and travel the world and all this great stuff, which I do. So I genuinely, I don't see that really changing. I just see that evolving. And I think at the heart of all of that is relationship. So as an example, like a year ago, get called up by Entrepreneurs Organization, come to Bali and talk about purpose. I mean, I couldn't make that up. What a wonderful invitation. And then I get to meet you and we follow up, etc. So that's all great. I really think if you were to ask me honestly, like, what do I want in my future? The main thing I want is, how do I make the most of today? How do I literally cherish today in a way to make the most of today? And I give you an example. Literally today, I am taking, so my mentor and coach, Graham Alexander, who's now in his 70s, and a really, really good, close colleague and friend of ours, very sadly passed away of cancer in his early 60s a few weeks ago. And we had a celebration of his life a couple of weeks ago. And I saw Graham there. I haven't seen Graham in years. And I thought, I'm not going to wait another decade until, the next funeral, or maybe it will be his funeral. I'm actually going to reach out and say, Graham, I want to take you out, for lunch now, not whenever. So that's what I'm doing today. And that for me would be, and I always think I'm too busy. I haven't got time. I had to reschedule it 3 times, but I was like, no, this is happening. I'm doing this. So I think it's really identifying what is most important now and absolutely committing to that. And, because I really think if I can maximize today and now, that's going to be the biggest impact on tomorrow.
Oh, that's beautiful, Ben. I love that. There's so many golden nuggets in there. And where is the best platform for people to find you? What's the best place for people to connect with you? They go, I want to read some of his books. I want to know more of what he posts, and to follow you, and to get more involved.
Wonderful. Yeah. So look, the easiest is LinkedIn. So I'm a huge fan of LinkedIn. I find it actually a very meaningful platform to connect. So please reach out there, Ben Renshaw. And then I'm actually finally rebuilding the website. So benrenshaw.com. So you're welcome to go there, but that will really get activated in the autumn with the publication of How to Be a CEO.
Beautiful, Ben. I could speak to you for hours, but really appreciate you being on, and really look forward to getting this podcast out.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shivani. You're doing great work. I really appreciate it.
I'm Shivani Gupta, and you've been listening to the Grow Your Business podcast. I hope you got one idea that you can think about, or perhaps even implement straight away in your business. Thank you for listening. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn under Ask Shivani. Remember, I call it Ask Shivani, so please send me your questions that I can address in this podcast for you. And I would also so appreciate if you went to the Apple Podcast to rate and review this podcast.